For the reminder. So welcome everyone. This is the Reducing Your Farm and Ranch Risks webinar series, and our special guest today to kick things off is Madeline Cantu from the USDA NRCS in Idaho. This webinar is part of a larger project bringing risk management education to Idaho's veteran farmers and ranchers through webinars, podcasts, and this fall, in-person regional meetings and tours. We thank you for joining us, and we're going to let Madeline take it away as soon as she loads up her slides.
Yes, and I think I figured out what was wrong with my camera, so it gave me a little bit. Apparently, there's a little shutter on it. So
that looks great now.
All right. Woo! I was like, what did I get on there? I'm going to share my screen now. You should be. Give it a sec. You should see it now.
That looks great.
Okay. I won't really get to have the chat running, I don't think, on the side. I'll be able to see when somebody puts something in, but I won't be able to read it. So I can pause if need be.
And Connie and I will watch and monitor the chat.
Yeah, and please, by all means, for those tuning in, let me know if there's a question. I do better with a back and forth. I'm really not a PowerPoint type of person. But yes, thank you so much, Ariel and Connie, for having me here. I'm Madeline Cantu. I am new to Idaho in the outreach coordinator position, new altogether, but outreach coordinator. Prior to that, I was in Michigan as an outreach coordinator briefly, and for about a year in the state office in Lansing. And then all my years prior to that, 14 years, I was in the field office. So in an office setting, providing these kinds of programs to customers. So the outreach is new, but it's something I'm really trying to hit the ground running with, because Idaho didn't have an outreach coordinator before that. So I hope to maybe network and bring more people and talk with, if anybody after this wants to call me up or come meet in person, or however we might need to do for more information, because I'm going to do a really brief overview. I'll hit a little harder on some programs and the background, but there's a lot of slides to this, and I'm not going to go through all of them very deeply because of the time constraint, and also not knowing where people's interests might lie. So some of these topics might be for another conversation. But so one of the first things I have on this presentation that I think is maybe underrated a little bit, because since we are a federal agency, it's always deadlines, right? Deadlines drive the work load that we have. And so sometimes the real basic kind of things, such as conservation plans, which we are historically known for, is really big. So what I wanted, can you show hands? Is there like where people can raise their hands or not in here? I'm just curious for who is on the call, if they are either interested in ag, or, well, I'm guessing we're interested in ag, but have you started a business, or you've already made your business, or are you starting, like looking into starting a production of some kind in agriculture? Are there any comments? Maybe as they filter in, please let me know, so I kind of know what type of experience maybe I'm dealing with. Some of this might be new, but I will continue as if maybe you have never walked into our office before. And that would mean that when you come in, we help people. Our motto is helping people help the land. What we do is, say you are interested in starting an agriculture production business of some kind. It can be anything from urban growing, like the hoop house situation, or maybe even slightly smaller than that, maybe some stuff in like a backyard, although it kind of gets limited there as to what makes sense financially. But all the way up to, of course, bigger acreage, any kind, livestock, crop. One that has come up a lot in Boise, is not a lot, but I've heard, is like cut flower production. That's not a traditional type, that is a specialty crop, but we do specialty crops as well. So if you were interested in improving your land for that, that would be where we could help you plant extra, like more trees. Maybe you want a hoop house for your garden. Maybe you need cross fencing for some type of livestock production. Maybe you have drainage issues. It could be something where you have a field and you're having runoff and erosion. It's hard to I don't want to get too specific down into the weeds, but that's where we help people expand. In a lot of cases, I do want to say for new and beginning farmers, we're kind of NRCS comes into play after you have your property, so we don't help you get property. You would have your property and have your garden, or maybe one cow or a goat or whatever it might be, and then we help you improve on that, expand on that. So I do want to mention that because a lot of times, particularly in other veteran groups, webinars such as this one that I've heard, is the main thing is how do we access the capital? We have these ideas, we have our business plan. How do we get the property? And we don't really help with that. That could be potentially another USDA agency, but we just look at more of what you're doing and how we can help you either do it more efficiently, if it's in some cases safely with if you're using pesticides and other types of chemicals and things like that. If you had come into my office and said, hey, I've got this, quarter acre, or maybe I have 5 acres, 10 acres, whatever it might be, what can I do with it? I would come out to your office if I were in the field office. This is for field staff. I would come out to your place, we'd walk it, look at it, talk about your goals. So you want to know what are you looking to do in about 5 years? Where do you see yourself with that property in 5 years? So we're not talking about we need to do it like next month. We're looking at years. We're federal too, so it takes us a while. We're deadline driven. The dollars are every fiscal year, so that's one of our barriers and one of our restraints that we have, and it's a pain, but that's what we have. So this is something that you're looking at doing in a year or two, and then we can help you from there, as long as you're not looking at like an immediate concern. Now we can still come out and say, oh, that is an immediate concern. Here's some contractors or whatever you might have trying to hook you up with those resources, but it wouldn't necessarily be through NRCS. But we have in that conservation plan, I would be absorbing all the information we're talking about in the field at your place, specific to your place, and I would go back to the office or wherever I am at, and I would create what you see on the bullets here. We can do a land use map, which is basically just an aerial map, sort of what Google does. It's all using basically the same aerial photography, but I could create that and say, okay, in this little section, there's a little cluster of trees. We're going to do maybe this in 2027. Over here, maybe you wanted the hoop house. I can draw that in and say, this is a hoop house for 2026 or whatever it might be. And I would map that all out. It would have all of your soils information. And I'll talk a little bit about where you can find that if you're a techie and you like to do things online yourself and you like kind of Google Earth. I'll remind me to mention Web Soil Survey, but it'll have soils information on there down to the limitations of the soil, the drainage, what type of soil it is, which can be really important in some cases, particularly with specialty crops or like an urban style garden. I'd have, of course, photos. That kind of varies from office to office, but I would usually take photos of especially because you want before and after. So I would take photos of the place, just talking about everything that is maybe a concern. We call them resource concerns, but they're really concerns for that land, such as, drainage, too much, too little. Is there a need for, water distribution for animals of some sort, so on and so forth. The economic costs and benefits. We do now nationally, we had them, and the pendulum swing, a lot of states didn't use it. Now I think it's required that we have a cost estimate before you ever sign any kind of contract paperwork. So if it came down to it, we would be able to say, this is how much we can financially assist. It's not going to be 100% of the cost. So for that hoop house that you had, maybe they spent, I don't know, it looked like maybe they had it at a smaller kit. Maybe they spent $12,000 on that hoop house. This is what we could pay, and then we'd have that written down. And again, this is going to be a lot of information. I'll see if maybe I can show some websites and resources at the end. But you can get a good idea of maybe 60% of the cost of most things. They don't like us saying percentage because everything, it depends on what you're doing. It changes, right? And that does change from year to year as well. But we'll be able to give you a cost estimate of all of that. Maintenance schedules and engineering notes. So if there, in some cases, if it's dealing with irrigation, maybe you need, and you have some topography, maybe we need to get engineers in there. If there's a drainage issue, maybe, if we're burying pipeline for livestock, our engineers are on staff and they come out and they would do the whole design for you and then tell you, you know, this is maybe the gallons per minute you need to make this work for this distance and things of that nature. I do want to mention that NRCS is completely voluntary. NRCS is not a regulatory agency. We are only voluntary, and all the stuff that you, like say you did decide to apply and you went into a contract, that's all PII, so we do not share that with others. So it's private and confidential. And unless you want to be like the, you know, pillar of the community and maybe do like a workshop on how NRCS worked for you. The main flagship program that we have is called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. We call it EQIP for short, because of course we're federal, we like acronyms. And it's also that's kind of a lot to say, it's a mouthful, but EQIP is one of our main ones. When you Google EQIP, and maybe you've heard of EQIP before, the hoop house could fall under this. We do another big one, if you're up in the north of Idaho, maybe forestry is a big one. All of that can kind of fall into it. And then the next program I talk about is kind of like, if it's kind of another step forward, and I'll talk about that one here in a minute. The Environmental Quality Incentives Program can be anywhere from like a 1-year contract to a 10-year contract. These are all competitive programs. So when you apply, funding is not guaranteed. And like I said, there is kind of a delay between application process and then moving on and seeing about funding. And if you are able to get funding for your project, but it covers a lot of things. Its main beef is these bullets here about improving air, soil, and water quality. So if you have one of those issues, that's what EQIP is following into, conserving water. In some cases, if you are an established producer and you have irrigation and maybe it's an antiquated, you know, outfit, like structure or whatever it might be, if we are helping to conserve, if we are again are improving that irrigation process instead of maybe going from flood to, you know, I don't know, a pivot or something like that. Preventing soil erosion, which is pretty straightforward. Enhancing wildlife habitat, again back into forestry as well, but grazing pastures, fallow fields, those can all be a big one. Of course, is pollinator wildlife habitat. So we have EQIP would be able to help with pollinators. And then mitigating impacts from climate change. So with that meaning impacts such as drought tolerance, other things along those lines. We do accept applications year round, but I want to stress that even though we do that, funding is typically once a year, and then depending on if there's more money that maybe another state didn't use, and they kind of can roll it into another one. But just think typically it's going to be 1 year. As of like right now at this point, all the contracts have been written from last year's applications, and if maybe some didn't get funded, carried over from previous years. So right now it'd all be done. People can now start working forward and implementing their practices and what they signed up for. So most of the time you'll be hearing about deadlines at the end of a calendar year. So maybe around October, November, you'll hear about an application cutoff for EQIP, which means that if you applied the day after, then you're going to be already another year out. So knowing of those deadlines, and one good way to make sure you are aware of those deadlines is to sign up for either emails or text messages on farmers.gov. You can sign up there and they will send you localized and also regional, and in some cases, maybe national deadlines as well. So you are aware of those dates so that you can write it on your calendar. So like in fiscal year 23, so last year's contracts, we helped producers on approximately 223,000 acres through EQIP. So that's a pretty good percentage. When I was comparing a little bit to, because I had Michigan's numbers, I updated this presentation to Idaho's numbers, and it kind of blew Michigan out of the water. So I think just because of the larger, maybe more vast, like larger operations. So the next program, the one thing I do want to make sure I mention with EQIP, the good thing about EQIP is you can baby step along. You decide how many things you want to do, and if you have a good field office staff, they'll be able to say you don't want to do it all at once. You want to spread it out a little bit because things change. It could be a really droughty year and you can't do what you want to do. You have to delay. Maybe there's an issue with labor that you can't get. So knowing that you're going to do your main priority goals first, and say you just want to pick one or two or three. I would say three is you're probably starting to push yourself, and you don't want to pressure it down. If those are your three things, you can do that, complete it. You're done. You can come back and apply again. So you can apply multiple times. You can actually put in 2 applications at the same time. In some cases, back in Michigan, we had to do that. It just depends on the practice. But so there may be 2 applications at a time. Your office will be able to share that with you on how best to approach it. I also wanted to mention, before I move on to the next slide, after all, with EQIP, say in most cases, there are some times where you can do a waiver. In most cases, if you were to apply for EQIP, you will do the practice. Say you wanted to do an acre of pollinator planting, all right? You would pay for the seed, and then we come out once you plant it according to our specifications, which are all on, you can find those all online, but we'll provide you that at a field office level. You would plant it. You would say, hey, Madeline, I planted my seeds that we talked about. I'm ready for you to come look. I'll go out, look, say, yep, we did. I'll measure it. Yep, it's 1 acre. You did the correct thing. Here's your seed tag. All right, I will now pay that money that we had estimated at the beginning of this whole process, that I will come back and pay. So it's almost like a reimbursement. I will also say that you will get a 1099 at the end of the year. So keeping that in mind, a lot of people say it's grant money. It's not really grant money, but you will get a 1099 at the end of the year. I think that was all I wanted to say for that one before moving on to the Conservation Stewardship Program, which they're really pumping a lot of money into this one now. Funding keeps going up and up, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act money, the IRA money. So the Conservation Stewardship Program is similar but different. So instead of it being kind of how long you want it to be with EQIP, CSP is a 5-year contract. You're going into a 5-year contract. The benefit of it is, though, it has a minimum annual payment. So with EQIP, you're getting paid for the practice, whatever percentage of the cost it might be. With CSP, you are getting your minimum payment plus a little extra to do the practices that you're agreeing to doing. I typically say that this one is maybe after EQIP. So if you're having like a more immediate concern, meaning immediate again in a long-term sense, like 2 to 3 years, that this is what I need first. I have these ideas, I need this in first, and then maybe I would do the trees along the side or whatever it might be. EQIP would be a good establishment, and then CSP coming in. There are cases where you could bypass EQIP altogether and just go straight to CSP, but a lot of times CSP is taking it even another step. So if you just went out and bought a 5-acre field or something, we would do EQIP first and then work that 5-acre field into maybe evolving into CSP. Similar to EQIP, we accept applications year-round. And it also is funded usually once a year. So again, you're going to wait to get in, but then this one you're in for 5 years, and it's a minimum of $4,000 annual payment. So it's a little more enticing than EQIP, because EQIP is, again, sometimes depending on 60 to, somewhere around 60 to 70% of the cost, sometimes higher. I've seen some, and it fluctuates a little bit, but I've seen some go up into 90%, where we're helping with 90% of the cost. But labor is a big thing. We don't pay for labor. We pay for the practice that we're installing. So whatever it might be, you're installing the hoop house, we're paying you this amount on the hoop house. You have to figure out how are you going to construct it yourself? Are you going to hire somebody? Is it going to be maybe a group of a community that can come and help you do it? Or are you going to have to pay a contractor? So thinking about these things, particularly before you go into the office, would probably be beneficial, because it will really bring it in to know I know what you would know what your costs are. I can tell you what NRCS help will be. So kind of coming to that same table, having a good idea, and going from there. If there's some times where you're like, I don't know why this spot over here just isn't functioning properly, then we could come out, help you, and that's done. We give you technical assistance, and it's free. Everything that we do is free, and then sometimes we can help you pay. Anyway, got off on a tangent there a little bit, but so back to CSP, 5 years, minimum $4,000. It's on any land use as well, urban included. And then in fiscal year 23, Idaho had about 380,000 acres in there. I do think that I think we're going to make the tabloids here soon, because we might get one of the largest ones in the country here in Idaho. So that's kind of interesting to put Idaho on the board for that. But yes, it's a pretty expansive program as well. So I wanted to share that. Let me continue on. These ones I'm going to gloss over a little bit. I don't know that they would be for this audience, but we do have some other programs. One is we call it ASEP, but the easement program is more for if there's like a wetlands area where maybe not real productive, you can put it into an easement program. So if you're interested in easements, this doesn't typically come up in conversations like this, maybe more so with partners, or larger properties. There's a Conservation Innovation Grant, CIG. These ones, again, are for non-federal entities. So if you think that you might need more information on that, I will drop my email in the chat and number in the chat here. But if you need more information on any of these, they are on our website. If you went into the browser of your choice and typed in NRCS for Natural Resources Conservation Service, just NRCS ID for Idaho, the first hit you get will be the Idaho State NRCS page, and it has a whole bunch of, if you keep scrolling, it has all of these programs on there as well as where your local office is. There's a drop down. If you scroll down just a little bit under the pictures, and if people want me to show, I can do that here afterward. But you can put in your county, and it'll show you who is in that office and who the main contact is. It'll have their name. It'll usually have if rural development or FSA, Farm Service Agency, is in there. It'll have that as their information as well. Conservation Reserve Program, this is a big one. We call it CRP. This is administered by Farm Service Agency. However, NRCS does the technical assistance for it. So you would sign up with FSA, and then the field office for NRCS would be the ones coming out to implement whatever might be going on, whether it's like a grassed waterway, a pollinator planting of some sort, or maybe a reseeding. I worked with this a lot in Michigan, where in the field office I was at up in the Eastern UP. And because of a lot of hayland, grassland, and it's not super productive. So it's pretty good for hayland. I don't know if there's many people on this call that this would fall into, but I can talk a little bit about that too if you need to drop me a line or give me a call. Those ones are typically 10 years, but sometimes 15 years. And so it's sort of like a baby easement. And then that would be where getting into like more of the administrative side, that would be Farm Service Agency. Regional Conservation Partnership Program, again, RCPP, but this one is big for partners or like communities. So I'm not really going to go heavily into that one, but I have some stats there just about RCPP. Idaho does have some pretty big ones with partners in here, and they're constantly trying to get more funding for that. So so that's another one for partners. I mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. You can see with the dollars down here that these numbers are only increasing every year. The IRA money has an earmark, so it'll start fading off. But one of the things is that we have more funding than we've had before. So field offices are kind of drowning in applications and field work and contracting. So, but this is pumping a lot of money into our programs, and it's trying to make it on a quicker turnaround. So I've been saying we kind of hurry up and wait, and you're going to have at least a year delay most times. That's pretty typical. I'd say maybe 2 on average, but they're trying to make it, National has been listening to like when states have these meetings and like kind of like a town hall, and the concern that continually comes over and over is it takes too long. It takes too long. We know it, and the National knows it. They're trying to get more staff. But just also being aware that if you do go to a field office, it might be better to go in person. If you give a call, you might not get a call right back away. You might have to call twice. A lot of times it's just because they're trying to do more with less. So just being aware too that there is a workload, but we do try to get back. And if anybody has issues with getting a field office to respond to emails or phone calls, or even if you walked in and they said, I'll make an appointment, let me know and I'll see if there's anything I can do to help, or maybe give a little nudge to your local field office, wherever that might be. Here's my information for those I saw somebody called in. I will type it in the chat as well, but my information, Madeline Cantu. My name is spelled a little bit weird, so remember there's 3 E's in Madeline at USDA.gov. And then that one is I think that's my desk number. I'll put in my cell number as well into the chat, and just to make sure that people know about that. I wanted to see if there were any questions first before I maybe show a couple of websites.
Yeah. Evelyn, I had a question. Yes. Yeah. So specifically, could you talk about if there would be anything different in the application process or the contracting process for military veterans, and what those parameters are? Because I think that's often very misunderstood and bears out some explanation.
Yes, I knew I was forgetting something. There's a long story about how I ended up in this room that I'm in. It's kind of weird, but because I'm currently in Raleigh, North Carolina. But yes, so for veterans, there's a couple of things. If you have looked at an application before, or even if you haven't, when you do get your hands on an application, they do have a box to check if you are a veteran. What that does is, say you are a beginner, which means 10 years or less consecutive of producing or operating a property, If you are also a beginner and a veteran, you get automatically 2 extra pools to choose from of money, which means that you have 2 chances to get your application funded. And typically, I've seen when I've been pulling numbers for veterans in Idaho that have worked with NRCS in the past, I can kind of see that fluctuation where it seemed to be going up a couple. I looked in the past five fiscal years. It seemed to be going up and then down and then up and then down. I think part of that is because they're getting captured in the beginning farmer. Or maybe a different historically underserved category, but it does give you a little bit of an extra lift up into that. Now you can actually go into, I think, like 3 or 4 different chances depending on, say, you're socially disadvantaged or a limited resource producer, things like that. They can give you, it kind of starts stacking so that when at a field office level you sign that paperwork, they're like, okay, I'm going to put it for consideration in the veterans pool, the beginning farmer pool, and maybe the socially disadvantaged pool. So that was a good thing. Also, for veterans, I'm hoping that this changes in the next farm bill, but you had to have been honorably discharged or exited service within the past 10 years. Don't ask me why it's 10 years. I don't know who came up with that, because it's not like you stop becoming a veteran on your 11th year. So I am hoping that definition changes. So fingers crossed. And I've heard some rumblings of that it has been brought up at a national level, but that's just a national definition. So in that case, being the veteran at least gets you have your regular pool and then your veteran pool. So there's your when you're competing for that funding, it gives you just another chance with the veteran status. So
You.
Can I
yes,
ask a question about that?
Yes.
Yeah, so what does it mean that there are these different pools? So are they separate pools of funding? Is it just sort of okay, you nodded. Yeah, tell me more about that.
Yeah, so let me see if I can put this in a kind of brief and comprehensive way. So let's talk about Idaho State. The NRCS has, say your cropland, there's that consideration. You go and you compete with other croplands, but if you're also beginning, you can go and compete with other beginnings. So these funding amounts they put at a state level. So your state office in Boise is deciding they're going to put $500,000 in this pool. Let's see how it gets used. And if that gets all used up, maybe we can take from another pool to finish that out. Or if it doesn't get used, you pull from that one and put it in another one. And you can, so that way, when you are applying, you're having those extra chances. You're like, oh, he's already in all of these pools, so you're in there already. So if that kind of makes sense, think of it like a bucket. We're putting a bucket with that label on it and then seeing if we need to refill it, or a lot of times it's going to run out. So, and particularly in some areas where maybe a pivot takes up a whole bunch of money, and that's why, it's kind of shot from there. But on an urban setting, typically those ones are like, they'll allocate less funding, fewer dollars for that. So I hope that kind of, I think of it like a bucket. And
Yeah,
then,
that explains it. Thank you. That's very helpful. So if you check multiple boxes, which pool of those boxes do you go to first? When it's being considered, because it seems like if they had some bad timing, lost that one, didn't get to the veteran one until a certain time, got there, that one's empty. Next, check, and finally you're out.
They do it all across the board. And part of it, that's a good question too, is it brings me to another thing to maybe hopefully put it into perspective, is say that you had not just a hoop house. Say you want to do a hoop house plus a little bit of pollinator over here and maybe plant some trees for wildlife back behind it. We're doing 3 different things. We're doing crop for the production, or if it's flowers, I mean crop as well. We're doing pollinator habitat, so a little bit of wildlife. And then we're doing trees, which might also maybe do some carbon sequestration or something in there. So you're doing 3. And then that means instead of just doing one thing, you have 3 things. And now your application is moving up because you're addressing more things than just one. So your ranking in that starts going up. So they start taking from the top and they go all the way down until the money is out. And they do that, they're doing it at the same time for all pools. So at the same time HU is doing it, they're doing it for veterans as well. They just go straight down and then say, we're going to need more money for one of these because we're just not getting there. If that kind of makes sense too. I wanted it because it is a ranking it's competitive. So if you are doing 3 things and somebody's doing 1, you have a better chance to get it.
It's very interesting and helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? I did see minimum based on acreage size. We no longer have an acreage size requirement. It used to be, actually it wasn't size. The requirement was you had to make $1,500 on ag related income to be eligible for our NRCS programs. That is no longer the case. You don't have to make anything. Another question I get a lot is for like hoop house production. They don't necessarily want to go to the farmer's market, but they might be giving it to their neighbors or using it for their family. So the income from that doesn't matter anymore. There is no acreage requirement. They've really been pushing more on an urban side of things. We'll see if that continues to go. I would imagine it will in the next farm bill. And they've been trying to make it more incentivized, because when you think about NRCS programs, especially if you had heard of the, the Soil Conservation Service, that was who we were before 1980 or 96 or something. We changed names for some reason, I guess, to be more inclusive of all natural resources. You used to think of it as, what do you think of the Soil Conservation Service and the government coming in and doing a big acres, 160 plus because of back in the day acres. And so when we try to do like urban kind of a setting, it's hard to translate. Okay, well, we pay by the acre. So if you're doing crop production on an acre, but you only have 1/10 of an acre and you're urban, that doesn't, you're not going to make any money. You're losing money. So they're trying to make it where it's more like for urban style, it's more incentivized to be effective to help. So it's going more like on square foot. So urban has its own little niche in there. It'll be interesting to see in the maybe next 10 years how that kind of I think it's going to evolve even better. They've come a long way already. They struggled with that for a long time while I was in the field office, switching it from an acreage basis to like a square foot or small area for urban, having its own funding, like financial assistance amount to that, back to that percentage of, yeah, I mean, I have 1/10 of an acre, that's not going to pay for the hoop house, so, but yeah, sorry, I kind of went off on there too. I'm kind of discombobulated today because it's been a interesting morning for me. I thought I'd have a little bit more time to prepare this morning, and instead I was running trying to find a place to close the door that I could. It didn't work out like I thought it would.
Well, we're just very glad that you were able to find a quiet place and still join us for today's webinar.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there are any other questions from this group. You can always just put them into the chat if you don't want to unmute and talk. And I don't know right now where everybody is from, but I do know that we are, we broadcast this across the state. So, I put the link in for where to find your local service center. And so it is, I just wanted to clarify. So when you get into the buckets or the pools, right, it is statewide. It's not, if you live in a more rural area, you're less likely to get help or more likely to get help. It's all statewide like that.
Correct. Yes. And there are some where they are more regional, like they're looking at a watershed level, but that's not really what we would necessarily be talking about here. For the most part, imagine it. Yep. Statewide bucket.
Okay. And in case there are some vets that are on this call who have been out of service for more than 10 years, what are some of the other ways that they can increase their chances in those buckets? You mentioned some of the different categories that would be priority or would be, you know, check boxes?
Yeah, so that would be the beginning farmer and rancher, which means again, haven't been in operation for more than 10 consecutive years. So maybe you went and farmed for 2 years after getting out of service or something, had to take a break or had some kind of life change, and then you go back in a couple of years later, it starts the clock again. It's 10 consecutive years. They're socially disadvantaged, which typically means if you are in a historically underserved group. Then there's a limited resource, which means you might be at the poverty level or your income issues, and there is a calculator for that. If you think you are, it should be on our website. It might be at the national website, but if you need that, let me know. I even probably have it bookmarked on my browser somewhere. And then they'll have a box for veterans as well. So those ones, they are all self-certified. So we don't have you bring out, if you're tribal, bring out a tribal card or Hispanic to show me that you really are Hispanic. That's all self-certified. And so we don't ask those questions.
And are women farmers, are they one of those categories, or are they not considered underserved anymore?
They are not considered underserved for NRCS. Don't really ask me why, because with Farm Service Agency, they are.
Okay.
That brings me to one other thing. With Farm Service Agency, typically we call ourselves sister agencies. We're almost always co-located in the same building. If you have not worked with Farm Service Agency, if your field office is good, they will walk you down there and stand there with you while they describe what they do, because think of FSA as they're the ones putting in all the paperwork to build you in the system. I mean, that means like location. They're going to give you a farm and tract number, which basically is just an identifier for your property that will come into play if and when you decide to work with NRCS. So a lot of times in this training I'm in, we had a couple producers say, I didn't really know who I was talking to. Like, they go down to the one thing and then back over here, and it can be a little confusing navigating that. But knowing that we are right down, they're the ones that are going to take some paperwork initially from you, and then we get into more of like, what are we doing on your property? And it all kind of talks together in the background in our computer system. So knowing too, I'm kind of glad that you mentioned that, and I segued into Farm Service Agency because that can be a little intimidating for new and beginning farmers. Not a little, it's a lot intimidating. And understanding the differences in what each agency does.
Thank you. And I will say that is going to be one of the goals of our project overall. Through our webinars, we're going to be bringing Farm Service Agency folks on to talk through some more of that. And then at our regional meetings, we hope to have local NRCS and FSA agents on site at the workshop so that you can actually sit down and have a conversation and maybe start filling out some paperwork right then. And maybe in a little bit less intimidating environment than walking into that big office and not knowing where to start and, you know, feeling a little bit overwhelmed. So I'm glad that you kind of gave the preface to that, because that is something that we're really set on addressing through this project.
Yeah, and sometimes like with all our acronyms, and sometimes the state agencies sound very similar, like in Michigan, Department of Natural Resources, and then here we are, Natural Resources Conservation Service. It can be, they think they're calling one person, but they're not. So yeah, so awareness of NRCS and that we are a federal one. We aren't state. We just work in your state. So.
Great. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I really hope that people have maybe piqued their interest in what NRCS can provide to them, and maybe go and check out that website, look at some different examples. I do know quite a few producers in Idaho who have been the recipient of the cost share for the high tunnels. I know that some that are getting ready to put in their second because they've had such a good experience. And I'm curious myself, as we start working toward our future incubator farm and how we might be able to incorporate some of those practices onto our farm, and looking at the requirements, I think we might qualify for some of those. So very exciting. Thank you so much, Madeline. I see you put all of your contact information in the chat. We will include that in our follow-up to everyone. And if you joined us late, this was recorded. Thanks to Madeline reminding me to hit record. Yeah, and next month we will be actually having a really great webinar with one of our extension professionals talking about the economics of cover crops and grazing cover crops. And so these are practices that if you want to adopt, you might talk to NRCS about helping to cover some of those costs and make that even more of a financial risk management strategy for you and your farm. So we'll let everyone know how to register for that one. And Madeline, I look forward to talking to you more and involving you more in this project in the next couple of years.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Ariel.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And remember, you're going to get a 2-minute, if that, survey that's going to pop up at the close of the webinar. Please let us know and feel free to email us with any thoughts or suggestions for future webinars and topics. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.